Hello, everyone. We're going to give a couple more seconds to let more people in, but welcome to the Smarter Together webinar. My name is Deborah Lamb, and on behalf of the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation, we're really excited to have you today on this special webinar. It's certainly a very timely webinar, given what's happening in DC with the infrastructure bill. And again, comes more to what we've always said about these webinars is how do we put applied research into practice that improves the human condition and benefits the community at large. And I have a really exceptional panel here today. This series of webinars around energy is co-hosted with our partners at the Strategic Energy Institute at Georgia Tech. So I'm going to turn it over to the Executive Director, Tim Lewin, to moderate this exceptional panel around hydrogen and thinking about kind of dissecting the next era beyond the hype into application, especially positioning for the state, region, and beyond. Couple of housekeeping, please feel free to use the chat box below to if you have any questions throughout the panel. This is recorded, as you know, so if you have any other additional questions about it, you are feel free to refer back to the recording for anything else. But let me turn it over to Tim Lewin for him to open up this panel again on hydrogen and again thinking about how it can be applied for the greater good. Tim?
Great. Thank you, Deborah. All right. So welcome, everyone. And so my name is Tim Lewin. I am also at Georgia Tech, and I run the Strategic Energy Institute at Georgia Tech. So at Georgia Tech, we have about 1,000 people working across the entire energy value chain, working all the way from sources of energy to utilization of energy, as well as cross-cutting system level issues around energy. And hydrogen is a strategic priority for us. We have quite a bit of work that we've actually been working on hydrogen for several decades and seeing a couple hype cycles go through, but I think this one's going to stick. And so the timing for this panel is perfect with the passage of the infrastructure bill. But very excited with the panel that we have today, including Commissioner Tim Echols from the Commissioner of Public Service Commission in the state of Georgia, Mark Berry, who is a Vice President and Head of Corporate R&D for the Southern Company, Scott McWhorter, who is a consultant, and Scott spent many, many years at Savannah River National Lab and has also been a key leader in some regional hydrogen initiatives, and then Neva Espinoza, who is a Vice President at the Electric Power Research Institute and also head of EPRI's very exciting new low carbon research initiative, which congratulations had a pilot demonstration last week in the state of New York. So we're looking to see some pilots in the South next. But just as a quick background for those of you who are, I know there's a broad set of attendees for this, and just for those of you who are not used to thinking about hydrogen or understanding what hydrogen is, I'll just give a quick 2-minute background. And there's a lot of analogies between the way we utilize electricity today and electric power and hydrogen. If you think about electricity, it's not a source of energy, it's a carrier of energy. It's a way that we move energy from where it is generated to where it is consumed. Now, hydrogen, in a similar way, today hydrogen actually has a number of uses. It's broadly used in the industrial sector, but it's not broadly used as an energy carrier. But if you think about a society where we're increasingly driving down our carbon footprint and where we're also looking for lower cost ways to store energy, hydrogen makes a lot of sense. Where imagine that you have a wind farm that's generating power at night when you don't necessarily need the power. You can essentially make hydrogen. There's massive storage capabilities for hydrogen. We have a well-developed pipeline system. And then you can essentially use the hydrogen to both store and move that energy from where it is ultimately starts from to where it's consumed. And so with that as a quick background, I am just gonna go straight to Commissioner Echols. And thank you, Commissioner. I know you are on the road, so I appreciate you making time for us. But if you want to just kind of sketch what you see happening in the state and in the region, what you think the opportunities for us are.
Yeah, first of all, greetings from Road Atlanta. I am here. This is the second annual EV Performance Corral, where we rent a space thanks to Jackson EMC and invite people to come and look at a number of electric cars. So we've got a Porsche Taycan here, a Mustang Mach-E, we've got the VW ID3, we've got an Audi e-tron, the Polestar made by Volvo. So we're inviting race fans to come take a look and consider electric. So any of you that are interested in coming out, I've got some extra tickets and would love to host you tomorrow or Saturday. Hey, I'm on the Public Service Commission, and one of the tasks that was created for us to do by the 1991 Georgia legislature is to do a 3-year, every 3 years, to do an integrated resource plan. And in that resource plan, we're allowed to create pilot projects that focus on emerging technology. And so we try things from time to time, like we did in 2019 with a Second Life EV battery charging apparatus. We tried community solar. I put into the rate case last time net metering and created that for Georgia Power customers. Hydrogen, I hope, is going to be a project that we can launch soon. I'm encouraging Georgia Power to come to us with a project in January as we kick off the integrated resource plan, because hydrogen allows us to serve customers, I believe, in more complete ways. Resiliency is important. Yes, renewables are important, but hydrogen adds this other vector, and that's transportation. It's cross-sector coupling. It provides a platform around a common green fuel, kind of like oil does today. As you think about what's happening in Houston at refineries and how plastics and fertilizer, fuel, oil was like that perfect fuel. I believe hydrogen will be the perfect fuel of the future. The role is big, but I think the transition is going to take time. The problems, I think it's more that the price is an issue because right now it's being treated kind of like a specialty chemical and not an energy fuel. And as a result, the price is simply too high. But I believe that the cost curve is going to be more like solar and like batteries. Look at what's happened over the last 12 years with solar, over the last 3 years with batteries. But it's going to take a little while for hydrogen to get on that same cost curve. Obviously, an electrolyzer could be a dispatchable resource. A lot of states are shutting down dispatchable resources. They're putting their grid in jeopardy. West Coast is example number one. But that hydrogen tank that's used for chemistry today can also be used for grid services. And so as people scale up the manufacturing of hydrogen, power generation from that resource can be scaled as well. And with that bigger volume, the price will come down, making it more feasible. The Southern Company, and Mark Berry will follow me today, they're studying the idea of creating hydrogen hubs like Houston is the oil hub. So we may have the opportunity in the South for the South region to be a green hub, green electricity from hydrogen, biogenic CO2, which is carbon neutral. And also, by the way, it allows us to have a green chemistry industry. Don't forget about plastics. Don't forget about chemistry. Right now, hydrocarbons come out of the ground for made from fossil fuels. Mississippi, I was just with a commissioner in Mississippi at NARUC this week. They're very excited about this too. You may have heard about the Norwegian company Yara. They're trying to make green fertilizer. Yeah, and you make it by taking natural gas, splitting it into hydrogen and CO2 and run it through their device with hydrogen and nitrogen, and then it makes ammonia. And then when you put it on the ground, the CO2 comes out of it and the nitrogen gets put into the soil for obviously the fertilizer. But we need these green electrons. We need green CO2 so that the total life cycle is net zero. The desire for this green hydrogen, and I really think it is going to be the next shiny object after batteries. Batteries are the next shiny object. Hydrogen is in line, but it's going to give small modular reactors another life because the opportunity or the provision of firm, cheap, dispatchable resources, it is the holy grail of making the transition work. And small modular reactors can help make green fertilizer, plastics, or power. It gives us that abundance. I mean, you've got all kinds of hydrogen, gray, blue, different colors, but green hydrogen is the projection of the future that provides for that abundance. But we have to get the price right. The Public Service Commission is not going to subsidize this. Maybe in a pilot project we do, but we're not going to subsidize it at scale, just like we haven't subsidized solar or really anything else. The power company needs to make it as useful to customers as possible. That's tanks, parts, pipes, et cetera. It makes sense to be on the regulated side of this. That's why we want the power company involved, because of the peaking power opportunity, the grid services opportunity that hydrogen has. It begins to look kind of like the last mile of wire, if you will, but we don't need duplicative infrastructure. That's going to cost too much. It's better to build one asset and serve a lot of people. The grid is that today, and the hardware that comes along with hydrogen is going to be that in the future, in my opinion. Electrolysis, tanks, pipes, and the machine to turn it back to electricity if you want to do that, or the machine that uses it to dispense to other uses. So I'll stop right there. Look forward to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I really like your point too about, obviously there's an energy angle here too, but there's also a chemistry angle. I mean, if we think about Louisiana and hydrogen as sort of the chemical export capital of the United States, and where the feedstock is fossil fuels, and the idea that there's a whole other value proposition and set of opportunities. You know, I think in the United States, the chemical export industry for this country is about a $700 billion industry. So that's a big number. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Berry. Mark, I got lots of questions for you. So maybe, I'd love to hear your thoughts on hydrogen value propositions that the Southern company sees, kind of what you see as some near-term projects for the region, and then, kind of what you see as the infrastructure bill enabling.
Well, Tim, thank you for this opportunity to give comments. I want to say that I very much agree with the message that Commissioner Eccles has conveyed here today. The conversation today is happening at a unique moment in time. Tomorrow marks the end of COP26 in Glasgow, where the Biden administration is trying to reestablish the United States leadership role on climate. And it is my belief that the future of hydrogen is tied to what our society decides to do regarding climate. If we decide not to act, then I think hydrogen will keep its current role as a niche specialized chemical that has a minor, albeit important role in our overall economy. Because in a business as usual scenario, I just don't see how financially hydrogen can compete with fossil fuels, which are the most dense energy carrier. They're abundant, easy to transport, relatively low cost, and fully integrated into society. But at Southern, in the R&D organization, we are trying to think about hydrogen, not just from an electric sector standpoint, but from an energy sector standpoint. The Biden administration has really set two goals. One is the electric sector being net zero by 2035, and the other, the US economy reducing carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. So in my opinion, it depends how you look at the problem. Do you look at it from the electric sector, or do you look at it from the US economy? So I'd like to focus my comments around, the state of Georgia. The Office of Budget and Planning projects that the state of Georgia is going to grow by 3.5 million people by 2040. And I think it goes without saying that if we stay on that trajectory, then the Georgia economy is going to continue to grow. And some of the sectors are important for that growth. The Georgia port will play a role, the Atlanta airport, agriculture, electricity, of course, where my focus is, transportation, and a fast growing sector of data centers. And a couple things that are in common there, those sectors are important for the Georgia economy, but hydrogen in a decarbonized economy couples those sectors. So it's a concept of sector coupling. So if the state of Georgia is going to continue to be the #1 state to do business in a decarbonized society, hydrogen becomes an important chemical. You know, the commissioner mentioned Yara and green hydrogen and how it can be used to produce fertilizer. If populations continue to grow, we'll definitely need fertilizers to feed the billions of people around the world. You know, at the Georgia port, maritime shipping, which contributes to 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, you know, maritime shipping could switch to away from fuel oil to green ammonia, green methanol, synthetic LNG, or other clean fuels, which would be enabled by green hydrogen. You know, at the airport, we've seen airlines and logistics companies, Delta and UPS come to mind, set goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by replacing some of their traditional jet fuels with sustainable aviation fuels. And those fuels can be created using hydrogen. You know, Delta, for example, has set a goal to have 10% of its fuel switch to sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. And I think UPS has a very similar goal. You know, from an electric sector standpoint, you know, the commissioner mentioned green hydrogen. So our interest could be selling electricity from renewables to companies that are in the business of producing green hydrogen. So those are kilowatt hour sales. We could also think about zero carbon hydrogen as a fuel in our gas turbines. And as the commissioner mentioned, it could be used as a chemical for long duration storage from multiple days to even seasons long storage, which provides a different value proposition than batteries. So look, for me, the opportunity for hydrogen is real. You know, Tim started his comments about the hype cycles of hydrogen. I agree with him that if we as a society want to decarbonize, that hydrogen is going to play an important role. I see a lot happening in our country around hydrogen. In the utility sector, you know, Tim mentioned the project up in New York at NYPA, burning hydrogen in a turbine. We've seen projects proposed in other states where green hydrogen is introduced into pipeline infrastructure, almost like a resiliency play. We see equipment manufacturers investing in demonstrations and touting their technologies from electrolysis to combustion to fuel cells. And the government is playing an important role itself. DOE set a earthshot goal of reducing the cost of producing green hydrogen by 80% and looking to do this in less than a decade, reaching that goal by 2030. Tim mentioned that this week, Congress passed the infrastructure bill, which contains $9 billion of potential investment in hydrogen, $8 billion for regional clean hydrogen hubs, at least 4 across our country, $1 billion for clean hydrogen electrolysis, and $500 million for clean hydrogen manufacturing. I think the hype is here. I think hydrogen has a bright future if we're serious, but we're definitely going to have to roll up our sleeves and get to work. And I very much agree with the commissioner that this technology around hydrogen will have to be reduced in cost such that we don't overly burden, especially Georgians here in the state of Georgia, with higher electricity prices. Tim, thank you so much for the ability to give comments.
Thank you, Mark. So I guess maybe I'll go take my next question to Scott McWhorter. So Scott, you know, we've heard a couple perspectives on the state of Georgia, but also on the region. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about the Regional Hydrogen Alliance that you've played a leadership role in, you know, what's happening at Savannah River National Lab, the E4 Carolinas efforts to analyze just the hydrogen supply chains in the region and what you see as the opportunities.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And sorry, I walked in a little bit late. Hope no one caught that. But so I'm Scott McWhorter, chairman of the board for the Southeast Hydrogen Energy Alliance, and formerly spent 20 years with the Savannah River National Lab, and actually spent three and a half years in DC with the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Technologies Office. Right. So I've seen it from many different perspectives there. And maybe I could just talk a moment about the hype train, and kind of build upon some of the comments that Mark made, where it was ending with costs have to come down, right? And if you go back and look 10 years ago, a decade, or just a little over a decade ago, when you see the cost of a fuel cell on a kilowatt hour basis was about $230 per kilowatt, right? And I think the cost now is approaching about $40 per kilowatt, right? That's automotive fuel cells. Right, so that just gives you a perspective on the trajectory that the costs are coming down. Just the small amount of investment that the government has been putting into it and the focused investment on that has allowed and pushed the technology out to be on the verge of larger scale commercialization. So that gives me confidence that those costs are going to come down, right? First and foremost, and so that the hydrogen hype is real these days. It's not like it was 20 years ago when they said, when a previous president said that a child born today, their first car will be hydrogen, right? Technology wasn't there, it was overhyped. Let's take it back to the region now. Just wanted to point out that just like solar, we're going to get to cost parity. We're going to reach that $1 per kilogram because it is achievable, but it has to get there for hydrogen to become ubiquitous. In the region, as I said, we've got the Southeast Hydrogen Energy Alliance, which encompasses utility partners, energy partners such as Siemens and Michelin utilities such as Dominion and Duke and NextEra, and we're having conversations with Southern Company as well, and Savannah River and several of the universities in the region. So we've all come together just to really and did this a few years ago to really substantiate what we could do in the region in hydrogen, not really anticipating the level of push that the new administration would have for hydrogen today. So there's a lot of talk and a lot of discussion around the technologies that we could start implementing. There's a lot of interest in planning in those types of technologies. But like you guys have talked about some of the other regions in the country that have natural resources that are fossil fuel based, whether it's natural gas or other fossil based, maybe coal and such. We don't have that in the Southeast, so we're a very different play. But I'll go back to again what some of the comments that Mark made about the connection between the ports, the rail, the aviation, in industry. It's very much a logistics play in the Southeast, and we see that kind of repeating over and over, where we have the Georgia ports connecting to Atlanta, so Savannah connecting through an inland rail to Atlanta, Charleston Port connecting through an inland rail to BMW, which is on the property of the Greenville-Spartanburg Airport. So there's tight connection there, and then you look at the interstates there, how they're connected. So it really connects long-haul trucking between those. And then if you consider, the Home Depots, the Walmarts, the BMWs, and others in the region that are all using, probably some of the largest users in the country of hydrogen fuel cells. BMW alone has about 7,000 hydrogen fuel cell forklifts in their plant in Greenville-Spartanburg. So these are all little hidden gems that we're all seeing now that are part of that logistical process in the Southeast that can really drive the growth of hydrogen as we see it in the Southeast. And then how we connect that really starts to build out that infrastructure across there to decarbonize that logistics sector. And then what we're looking forward to is working with the utility sector so we can start to decarbonize the energy sector, so that when we bring on more EVs or when we bring on more light duty transport vehicles, that those are really decarbonized sectors of the country. So that's kind of how we see it in the Southeast, and where Savannah River has really played a role in all of the hydrogen development is it's in the core mission of Savannah River, being we're the nation's tritium supply, right? That goes into nuclear weapons, but an isotope of tritium is hydrogen, right? So 40 to 50 years of experience in handling these materials, and all of that tritium, all of the nation's tritium supply is stored in solid state hydride materials, one of the safest forms of storing hydrogen, right? And that's a well-known expertise, or maybe not as well-known expertise of Savannah River, is just understanding the thermodynamics of metal hydride materials, right? And how you store hydrogen, the interaction of hydrogen in those, and also the interaction of hydrogen in different types of materials that in tanks and pipes and things like that from a safety perspective. When we talk about hydrogen blending in the current mix of natural gas pipeline, we've got to understand all of those effects that might cause embrittlement, might cause premature failure of those pipelines. So these are things that the Savannah River has really brought to the table for industry to really start to adopt and carry out. Because again, I'll go back to the Southeast. For any of that energy to cross into the Northeast or to our states to the north of us, all of those pipelines come through the Southeastern corridor, right? So there's a real opportunity to use the Southeast as a test bed for all of that pipeline blending that Mark talked about, so that we can start to achieve 10, 15, 20% of hydrogen in the natural gas pipeline, and really look at how we can move forward with hydrogen pipeline in the future to support whether it's gas turbines or transportation infrastructure. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Scott. I got a bunch of questions, but I following your, but I'd first like to go to Neva. So Neva, can you, now that we've had kind of the state regional perspective, can you talk to our group a little bit about the LCRI program in general, and then kind of what you see happening kind of nationally, maybe talk a little bit about some of your recent demonstrations and where things are heading on a more global scale?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So Tim has mentioned a couple times this term LCRI. So LCRI is something we call the Low Carbon Resources Initiative. It is an R&D program that is supported from almost 50 energy companies here, or globally actually, that's really focused on the entire value chain of hydrogen, ammonia, synthetic fuels, biofuels, right? So this future economy where lower carbon fuels become a much larger part of how we think about energy and how energy plays a role above and beyond any one sector, right? This is an economy-wide look at how energy changes over the next 3 decades to achieve a net zero economy by mid-century. And it's certainly a heavy lift. There is a lot of work that needs to be done in order to enable that type of economy moving forward. So we talk about the idea of hype around hydrogen, and why are we talking about hydrogen again? Well, we're talking about hydrogen because we absolutely don't have a pathway today to achieve net zero, right? The goals we have are super aggressive. The technologies needed to meet those goals are not commercially available and scaled or priced the way we need them to. And it takes a super long time to develop technology, right? for 40 years. 40 years is a typical cycle for true technology development from initial concept through commercialization and scale. So the difference today with hydrogen is there's a true driver to get there, right? 60% of the energy economy today comes from a carbon intensive source and is not well suited to potentially be electrified. So we need something else to make that up, and we don't have that solution available to us. So that's a little bit about what the Low Carbon Resources Initiative is, and I'll drop here links in the chat in a moment for those who would like to learn a little bit more about it. From a global and U.S. perspective, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? Certainly around the world, we see a ton of investment. There was a lot of commitments and promises made, of course, over the past 2 weeks during COP, which we're excited about. But you see different countries above and beyond the United States also making efforts in this space, and they all have different resources. They all have different industries. They all have different pathways to achieve net zero, but we all have that same net zero driver. I would like to talk a little bit about demonstrations as well, as we think about how does hydrogen, and when I say hydrogen, I like to say, I talk about hydrogen, how people talk about like soda or Coke, like you say, I'll take a Coke instead of like a Pepsi or Coca-Cola. So hydrogen to me is kind of like that. So when I say hydrogen, I typically mean hydrogen, ammonia, and other synthetic fuels that may come from it as we move forward. But so, thinking about the demonstrations that we're going to need are very, very important. So the commissioner and Mark and Scott have really done a fantastic job framing the need for the economy-wide approach. So first of all, when we talk about hydrogen, we know that we have a hydrogen value chain today. It exists around the world, right? But it is made up of high carbon hydrogen, dedicated pipelines, and a bunch of very designated end use, right? Refineries, agriculture, etc. That is very different than the value chain of hydrogen we're talking about tomorrow. The value chain of hydrogen that we're talking about tomorrow has different production pathways because we need low carbon hydrogen. It has different delivery and transport needs because we're thinking about it really filling a void of long duration energy storage. And it's going to have very different uses. So think about heavy duty transportation, for example, which has been referenced here several times. So not only is that chain going to look very differently, but the scale is going to look different. And there's different projections out there on how much hydrogen and low carbon fuels we'll need in the future. They range anywhere from 2.5x to over 8x. But so that new value chain and that new piece of it is relatively unproven. Right? It's very different than the value chain today. And that is what is driving the need for further technology development and for further demonstration. Now, when most people think about technology demonstration, like typical demonstration, that implies just a technology. So in this case, you may be thinking the supply side of the equation. How are we going to supply hydrogen? We're going to think about an electrolyzer itself. But in this case, demonstration is also going to need the demand side. It's going to be equally important to understand the chicken and the egg conversation, if you will, here in the hydrogen world, which is really where the concept of, people like to say hubs, I like to talk about net zero industrial clusters because hydrogen is going to be one of many solutions in them. But clusters can really break this stalemate, creating partnerships that will help solve the supply demand challenges and help de-risk the transition from both sides of the equation. So I'm really excited around the commissioner's approach, of course, Southern Company's approach, as well as the hub approach that's starting to build here in the Southeast region, because they're a great way to buy down risk. Now, not every demonstration you need will have to be as complicated as a hub, right? So some of them will certainly be cluster hub focused, but other demonstrations may look at partnering two things. For example, production and storage, or maybe storage and end use. And this may be a lower cost pathway to help us capture different pain points in the integration process, while also avoiding some of the optimization across a much more complex energy system. Scale will matter for sure. So when you look at driving down cost curves and you look at shifting from like pilot demonstrations to larger commercial deployment, you keep growing maybe on a 10x scale or so. So scale will really be important. But I also think that the partnerships and the investment here is going to be important. And Mark talked about, the significant amount of opportunity that's going to come out of the infrastructure bill. So between, what will be in the infrastructure bill, there's a lot of other money that is moving forward in terms of this Build Back Better, cleaner plan. And you think about the DOE loan guarantee office, these are all going to be really important when you think about financing these projects. So when you're moving forward with these large types of demonstrations, there's a lot of risk associated with them, and we need to find out ways to buy down risk. So when we think of risk, we think about 3 core types, right? There's market risk in itself. So is there going to be demand for whatever you're creating? There's firm risk, meaning will a particular firm potentially survive the transition of this technology into this new world? And then of course there's the technology itself risk, like does the technology work? So that's a pretty big risk bridge to cross for many of these investors. So really finding opportunities and leveraging the opportunities of the government, of other philanthropic organizations that are coming together to help us buy down those risks as we move forward will be critically important to start seeing these things be built out and scaled here across the US. So Tim, I'll turn it back to you. I know there's probably lots of conversation in the chat and great questions you'd like to lead into.
Thank you, Neva. Yeah, thank you, everyone. So I think what I'd like to do is just kind of synthesize a couple of questions and, just pull some threads out. So I think, I heard kind of 3 key threads here. One is just the idea of this idea of a green chemicals industry utilizing hydrogen as a completely different feedstock for a whole chemicals industry. There's the whole transportation and logistics angle that Scott really emphasized. Then there's also using basically hydrogen as a really long duration battery for our electric power sector. So maybe if we can hit each one of those separately, and I'll start with the logistics and transportation piece, and just talk about what do you see as kind of the first use cases, both in the region but also nationally, and are these I think we talked about the port, we talked about UPS, where and how are we going to see these happen? So I don't know who wants to grab that.
Yeah, Tim, I'll jump in there,
Okay.
and maybe Scott can bag me up. I know he probably wanted to jump in there first.
You're good.
I do think hydrogen, probably from a cost standpoint, Commissioner Eccles made that point, which we should all be paying attention to around cost, is that hydrogen is probably more cost effective competing with the petroleum product than say an electron. So we're going to build out use cases, whether we're producing green hydrogen or whatever. I think the initial uses are going to come in the transportation sector. The one that's probably most near term is going to be ground transportation, and long haul trucking just really makes sense to me as a great place to start. I don't think hydrogen in terms of fuel probably plays well in the Southeast for passenger vehicles, but I think for long haul, hard to decarbonize transportation, that hydrogen has some value. So I would say that's probably a good place to start. We are seeing lots of movers kind of in the Southeast, logistical players making commitments there. So you could probably build a pretty good collaborative where you piece together and leverage dollars to do some demos and start some learning here in the Southeast.
So, and I'll just chime in there as well. I would agree with everything that Mark said. It's really driven in, especially what I always say in the South, everything's a business decision, right? We don't typically drive it through regulatory issues, but for long haul trucking, hydrogen already makes the case. Total cost of ownership at hydrogen between $7 and $10 a kilogram. It will beat out diesel today. That's why you're seeing a lot of companies, Toyota, Nikola, jumping in that game because they can make the business case. And as the cost of hydrogen starts to come down, and especially as we transition over to green hydrogen, I mean, there's no way the other technologies can catch up. So I will say that's going to be a really big play in the Southeast, but that's going to also depend on your infrastructure, right? And so we'll just take a microcosm of that. We've got some logistics plays, as I mentioned, already in the Southeast. Let's look at all the warehouses and the logistics that are within a warehouse, running forklifts and things, because that time is money in there. And so the whole reason that industry really was pushed over to hydrogen rather than batteries, because there was a battle there for at least a decade, it was really time to refuel, right? And that's the flexibility that hydrogen fuel cells gives you in that logistics play, because long haul trucking can't spend a few hours stopped at a refueling location to recharge batteries. Forklifts couldn't spend 30 to 45 minutes recharging these batteries, and all the handling you had to do with the batteries. They want to spend 5 to 7 minutes. I've heard that from Plug, had those conversations. That's what their customers demand. That's what they can get with hydrogen. So that is something that they meet the total cost of ownership today, right? They make the business case. And I think, as Mark mentioned, it doesn't quite get there with light duty vehicle transportation today, right? And it's primarily an infrastructure case today. As that infrastructure starts to build out because of the long haul trucking, then you'll start to see that transportation case start to pick up in the Southeast. But it's really got to it's going to be based on cost. So Tim, I know you want to say something there. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been doing the Alternative Fuel Roadshow for 11 years. We'll be in Savannah at Georgia Tech next Thursday, a week from today. And part of the issue we've had, and we're about to cut the ribbon on the largest compressed natural gas station closest to the port. So there's not a single drayage truck in Georgia that runs on natural gas. In California, I was recently at the port of LA, and they had about 500 running on natural gas. So they're way ahead of us in that, but they have a much more robust natural gas network, and they are also keeping their drayage trucks out there. Let me remind you that when you're driving down Highway 16, I-16, and you see those trucks pulling the containers, those are dray trucks. They're older trucks. They're often owned by independent people. They can't afford a new CNG truck with a Westport engine, and they certainly can't afford a hydrogen truck. So I am appealing to UPS. Help us keep your new trucks that you buy that drive up and down 95 that run on natural gas. Help us keep those in Georgia so that we can use them. Let us have them for the secondary market. Don't let them get away out to California or other places. So, getting these truckers, and you mentioned long haul, and yeah, they have the money to do it, but getting truckers to be able to use this fuel, you've got to have the fuel at both ends, right? You've got to have it on the route, and it hasn't been cheap to build compressed natural gas, and hydrogen. Hydrogen fueling, a little bit different, but it's about $1 million for a CNG station. So I think that we have to look at these markets and these OEM manufacturers. And how are we going to how can the trucking industry have the confidence to know that there's going to be fuel where they need it in a way that they need it? And, it's a group that probably most of us on this call aren't used to working with. Trucking OEMs, truck drivers, truck stop owners. These aren't people hanging around the Georgia Tech campus, right? So I think it's going to be harder than we think. I'm all for it. I'm just, after doing this for 11 years, I've just become a little more of a realist on this.
But so Tim, I would agree with that. The infrastructure is going to be everything there, but that's why we have to be a little more creative in the first in, right? So maybe we can't afford and so we've got to optimize where those stations are going to be, but we need to look at options that allow us to get there. One of the things that we can really start to look at is the rail option, right? Hydrogen is not necessarily transported by rail today, right? It has been down in Florida but it was a safety codes and standards issue. I think that's been resolved, but that gives us a lot of flexibility where you could set up these rail cars as stations and drop them in multiple locations, maybe a station on demand type of concept to fulfill that need, right? So we've got it. Hydrogen gives us a little more flexibility. You could do that with natural gas as well, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, let me. I want to ask Neva a question here, and I want to start shifting gears from the transportation logistics to electric power. But I think maybe the way I'll frame this question for you, Neva, is one of the distinctives of the U.S. energy market is electricity is really cheap relative to transportation. So if you start pricing energy rather than per gallon of fuel, but per unit of energy, how many if you price gasoline, dollars per unit of energy or something like that. Transportation fuels are about 5x what fuels that we use for electricity are, like natural gas, which immediately implies that, I think that drives a lot of this discussion around why transportation is sort of the low hanging fruit. That's not true in Asia, right? In other parts of the world where transportation fuels and electricity fuels are oftentimes have parity. And so I'm just kind of curious, Neva, if you could just reflect on, what do you see as the different drivers regionally, nationally, and globally for these hydrogen value propositions?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Tim. And so when you think about these solutions, right, and all the time I say global problems create, or global challenges need global solutions, and that's great. And hydrogen is a global solution, but how it's going to be applied to individual areas, I think, is very, very different. And that is going to be based on, it's going to be kind of localized, right? And especially with a hub or cluster approach, that's what you see. So it's going to be very much based on what are the natural resources there in that region, what are the industries in that region, what does the economic development plan in that region look like where's that region trying to go as they partner together to look at that. So I think all of those pieces are really important. I also think that as we look at developing these larger demonstrations, economy-wide demonstrations, it's important to have an anchor. So what is the anchor, right? Is it, we're going to make this airport, we're going to create an economy around this airport, or we're going to create this economy around this port, or we're going to create this economy around this great CO2 geological storage resource we have, and create something around that. So I think identifying the true anchors in the region are critically important. And we've done some initial work to do it like a mapping, right? If you look at different regions of the US, and if you look at the Southeast region, you can start creating layers of mapping, right? Where are the CO2 emitters? Where are the different industrial applications? Where are the different build out of solar wind? Where do you have transmission lines? Where do you have hospitals? Where do you have all? And as you start building that, you start seeing these very natural clusters of areas where you say, okay, here's an anchor spot. Who are the partners in this area, and how can we pull those in? So I think that although there are frameworks you can use that are going to be very globally relevant, when it comes down to it, like the nuts and bolts, you need to figure out for your area what that anchor is for you.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the time here, so we'll probably have time for 2 more questions, but maybe.
Hey, Tim, can I
Yes,
jump in on that,
Yes,
on Neva's
please do.
comment? The one thing that I want to mention, and I want to, go back to something that Commissioner Echols said earlier, is the cost of these projects and building this infrastructure. So earlier I mentioned on hydrogen hubs that there is, $8 billion for hubs. So let's say if you had one, you decide to do a hub, and it was $1 billion hub, the cost share requirement is 50%. So the partners would have to raise $500 million. And those partners are taking on a huge challenge for the country and will be required to make significant investments. So I just do want to mention here, while I'm definitely positive about this technology and where it's going, that we have to recognize that the diverse partners that are needed and the significant investment that each of these partners are going to have to make. And the returns might be slim in the beginning, but they're going to have to make those investments if we're going to make progress.
So Mark, while you're talking, I want to start unpack this thread real quickly around electric power. We've talked about transportation logistics. Can you talk a little bit about where you might see use cases, early use cases in the electric power space?
So I think in the electric power space, it's going to be learning by doing. It's going to be the first kind of movements. If you think about hydrogen in terms of cost, so if you say green hydrogen is $5 a kilogram on a BTU basis, that's almost $40 a million BTU. And as a fuel, it would be competing against natural gas, which is $3 to $4 a million BTU. So there's a huge cost pressure there. So I think for us in the electric sector, the early movers are likely going to be demonstration projects, and there could be battery or energy storage projects might provide some value. That's where I think is how it's going to start.
But I would say that you're seeing it today, right? Telecom backup. So backup power has already started that transition over to hydrogen. I believe Southern Company has a lot of cell phone backup power on hydrogen today with plug power, right? So I think that's Southern Link, right? And so we've seen that transition. So it obviously makes the business case today for a lot of that backup power when you need 48, 72 hours of duration. But as you go longer, that's where hydrogen is going to win out on some of the battery technology. But it's also the flexibility it gives you in those cases. So, but I would agree for larger, for some of the really inexpensive fuels that we see today, hydrogen's got a long way to go to catch up. But in terms of grid balancing, load balancing, and some of those high demand, peak demand hours, that's where you're going to see hydrogen start to make a play, when you can develop it with either negative value or low value electrons, right? You can produce green hydrogen, and then you can use it during peak demand hours. So it's going to be its use is going to be, I'd say, very distributed in that case. But that's the flexibility hydrogen gives you again.
So Commissioner Eccles, quick question for you. I guess, putting on your Georgia PSC hat for a minute, I think obviously there's big challenges, and I think there's significant opportunities for regional partnerships. So how would you encourage the rest of this audience to be thinking about ways in which we can facilitate Georgia, Alabama, North and South Carolina, Florida, et cetera? What are productive ways of working together?
Well, we've just seen FERC approve, essentially by not approving, the SEAM proposal that's going to really allow us to move solar energy around more than we've been able to. I think some people thought maybe we were moving towards deregulating energy here in Georgia. It's not. Obviously, Georgia Power would never have been for it had it been any kind of deregulation play. But I think there are opportunities for us to work with other states, particularly because Southern has, an Alabama footprint, a Mississippi footprint, and being able to take those three states, which all have a lot of manufacturing, particularly Alabama and Georgia, and be able to work together with lots of different, manufacturers, businesses, even Fortune 500 companies, and of course the Southern Company, to be able to do something like this off or
Yeah, Commissioner, I think
attract investment to be.
Okay. So thank you, Tim. I have one last question. So Neva, maybe just in 2 minutes, do you mind just quickly talking about kind of what's the LCRI strategy around pilots and deployments, and maybe just talk a little bit about the NIPA?
Sure. Yeah. So I'd be happy to do that. So through the Low Carbon Resources Initiative, we intend to fund and be engaged in as many demonstrations and pilot projects as we can. Of course, we will bring cost share to many of those projects, but the biggest part of that is we're really trying to create a clearinghouse of the information, right? A base of knowledge for the industry to push back out. We cannot be doing all these projects in parallel, the same things, and not leapfrogging and learning from each other. So that's really what the LCRI is created to do. We are involved in numerous projects, many of which that are funded from the Department of Energy and others that are demonstration type projects. The project that we announced 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, in New York up at the New York Power Authority, was actually funded from the New York Power Authority. LCRI had some dollars within that, of course, and then some of the other partners in the region. And that is a hydrogen blending project in gas turbines, right? So it is actually going to be the first US demonstration of a commercial gas turbine blending hydrogen to really understand how will there be changes to the operational profile, and then a lot of the learnings will really come around the emission profile and what that looks like. So that project will blend up to 30% hydrogen in 5% increments over a period of time, obviously very controlled with a lot of safety precautions and project plans in place to make sure we do that responsibly. But we're really excited about, first of all, actually showing this, right? Doing the demonstration, saying, look, we've done this, it can be done, but understanding the reality of that being part of the use of hydrogen in the future, what that looks like for the machine itself, and then what that may look like broader for a hydrogen economy of, is this really the best use of this type of high quality, low carbon fuel? So a lot of great learnings will come out of that project.
Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left. So maybe I've just asked each of the panelists just kind of a 30-second closing comment. And I'll start with Mark.
Tim, my closing comment would be the word excitement, that I'm excited about all the work that is going on around hydrogen. I think I see people coalescing around the same core concepts. So I am very encouraged that we're going to make progress and bring this technology to bear to bring value and reduce emissions.
Great, thank you. How about you, Scott?
Yeah, I would echo Mark's comments that there's a lot of excitement around it. I'm excited to see the investment that the U.S. is making, that the world is making around hydrogen, and it's going to be a huge challenge, but I think we can get there over the next decade.
Great. How about Neva? You're on mute.
I lost my mute button. I apologize. So, not to just echo, but I do echo. I'm also very, very optimistic. I see some of the best minds coming together and pushing this. And I think that the opportunity for partnership and collaboration is there, and people are jumping on it and looking to make this work together. And I think that's going to be critical as we move forward.
All right. So, Commissioner, do you have any words of pessimism, or are you also going to echo the optimism?
Yeah, one shiny object at a time. Yeah, so I just think it's just hard to deploy everything so quickly. Georgia's been the tip of the spear for nuclear. We can't be the tip of the spear for hydrogen. I just don't think we can do everything. We need somebody else to step up.
Well, we weren't looking for that much pessimism.
I'll say I'm sitting in South Carolina, but I live in Georgia.
I think there's some great use cases at Savannah Port. All right, well, thank you. This is a great discussion. Deborah, is there any kind of closing remarks that you wanted to make, or should we close it out for today?
No, I think you've said it well, and I like to end on a high note. So thank you, everyone, and I look forward to this next stage, and look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks to the panelists.
Everybody.